All right, everybody, welcome to week 7. This week we're going to finish up that project we started on week 5. But first, let's kind of go over what we're going to do this week. Obviously, we're going to watch this video, read the chapter, follow along with the Japanese flag video in Canvas or in Cengage. That will kind of give you some basic concepts: how to draw a rectangle, how to draw a circle, the fill styles, and that stuff. It's also in the book. It's really good information. We're going to use some of that in the project, obviously. You can download the code to follow along, or you can follow along from scratch, however you choose to do it. I want you to do the self-test exercises. There's only 5 of them this week. Pretty simple, easy 100. And then we're going to do I want you to do quiz, and we're going to cover the programming project in this video, kind of what we need to do and how you need to go about completing that. So let's jump into it. Your app should look something similar to this, obviously not without the colors. I went a little overboard with CSS, just playing around and seeing what I could and couldn't do. But you should have your about page, which is finished. You should have the finished patient info page that now you can add and delete and edit the data that's in the database. So those 2 pages are finished. This week we're going to work on the last 2. The first one is going to be a graph. And the second one, actually, this is not going to be a graph. I'm going to show you how to just draw some lines and circles on here dynamically. Had we done our app a little bit differently, we would have ended up with something that looks like this, right? If we had done our application in a manner that we could add patient data and continuously track weight by date and what they weighed at the time and add multiple things in there, we'd have a data set with a bunch of dates and weights, and we could kind of plot a graph, right? And it would, go up and down as they were weighed each month. We didn't do that, and honestly, doing a graph like this is difficult and kind of tedious. There's something called charts.js, and this, if you want to graph data, I suggest importing this library, kind of just like you did with jQuery. You download it, add the JavaScript to your project, and then you have to kind of learn the syntax and the little things that charts.js can do. But this plugin is amazing for graphing data, and it can do all kinds of things. Again, that's kind of beyond the scope of this class. The book tells you how to graph things a little bit, but mostly, again, this chapter is called drawing on the canvas, not graphing. They show you kind of how to do a graph in the book, but it's really complicated and annoying. I would suggest, if you're interested, go out, get charts.js, and make a chart. That's good stuff. And if you like data, that's really good. But what we're going to do instead is, let's see, I don't think I have anything loaded. And my local storage is not loaded. So let me do this, because I put that function on the index page to load local storage. So now it's loaded and I have patient database. So when I go in to the patient info, I can now search for, let's look at Steve Rogers. We search for his information, it pulls up, and we go to the graph, and you can see that he weighed 240 pounds. He was 6 foot 2 inches tall. And again, in patient data, we add that in inches. So 74 inches is 6 foot 2. So his BMI, according to this chart and calculator, is 31. Now we go to the recommendations page, you'll see that there's an image with male figures, and the obese one is highlighted. This graph with all the height and weight, that is an image. This is also an image with a rectangle drawn on top of it. And these, obviously, these lines and circles are drawn on top of that image. And then it gives you a little recommendation, or not even, it's just a little blurb. It says you're obese when the obese thing is calculated. If we go back to the patient data, pull up somebody else, the Scarlet Witch. We graph her stuff. You can see the lines change. She's normal, or in the normal range for body weight and recommendations. The graphic has changed to a female. The rectangle has highlighted at the normal range, and you can do that for everybody. Let's see. There are some limitations before I do this. There are some limitations to this graph. Under 90 pounds and under 4'8", it won't register, obviously, because that's the limitations. And over 290 pounds and 6'11", it won't register. It just won't work. Maybe I should have it pull up an error or something, but it just won't work at this point. But if we go in here, we can add a new person. Just give them random stuff, and we will make them, I don't know, 6'4" or 5" or something, and 100 pounds. And we'll make them male, tall, skinny. Add it to the database because we did that last week and this already works. And then when we go to the graph, we can see that, again, the lines are changed dynamically based on what's in there. The recommendation changes. And then we can test it again by and we'll make them short, but they have to be over 4'8". So we'll make them, what, 5 foot tall. 5 times 12 is what, 60? And 250 pounds. I think that is overweight. I'm not sure. Add them to the database. Go to the graph. Yep, that certainly is overweight. You can see the lines changed dynamically. And the background screen changed from male to female. And obese is highlighted. So we're going to kind of show, I'm going to go over what I did a little bit and see how that works out. So we got our graph page. In the graph, we have a div ID of graph so that I can style the background. We have a panel heading, which ends up being this right here, patient BMI on the scale. The panel heading, and then obviously the heading in the panel heading. And then a separate div is the canvas. This is the background image right here that we're using. So it's just a style. You can do this in the CSS, or you can do it right here in the HTML. I set the canvas height and width 600 by 800, and I believe that is the height of the page. Yep, 800 by 604 pixels. That's the height and width of the image itself. I have, before I forget, I have put in underneath the programming project, I put in this little link here. Open it up, download the zip file, and it's got a couple of assets in here. When you download it and open it, you'll see that there is the BMI chart picture. This BMI chart is this background image. The female and male BMI, that goes on the Rex page. That'll be your background image for this page. And you'll switch between the two using an if statement. If it's a female, you're going to put the female page up. If it's a male, you're going to put the male picture up. And then I've also included a variables.txt. The only reason I did that, again, graphing becomes a little bit difficult. Drawing and graphing, you have to take the size of your division and multiply it by how many different, or divide it by how many different things you want to put in there, figure out what the pixels are. And there's a lot of underlying work to make sure that the circles and the what you're drawing lands in the right spot and isn't off. So because I included these graphics, I also included that variable in there, and that will be, you will put that in your JavaScript somewhere. Okay, right here. So I made one function for draw, and it draws everything. And I made the variable weight graph and the variable height graph. And these are the X and Y coordinates for each of this. Like 90, 122 on the weight graph is going to correspond to this 20 here, 90 and 48. It's going to, I think that's right. No, it's probably going to be the circle for this 90. Yep. So this blue circle, the X and Y coordinates are going to be the first thing, 90, 122. So I can take this variable and then plug it into when we draw circles, where we draw circles at, and it will land in the right spot. I hope that makes sense. Good knows I'm not very good at describing stuff. But if you have a question, send me an email. All right, so back to the graph, right? So we need a couple of things before we do this, and you'll notice that my local storage is a little bit different. So when I go from patient info and I've got Steve Rogers info pulled up, when I click this button, not only is it going to move over to the graph page, but it's also going to store a few things in local storage. I have it storing the weight, storing the height, storing the gender so that we can then change the backgrounds and that we know which height and weight it needs to go to. I also have it doing the calculation and storing the BMI as soon as the graph link is clicked. As soon as that link is clicked, the functions will fire and it will use those variables to then create these little lines. Let's see. So we're starting here. Calculating the BMI. You're going to get the current weight that's on the page, or current height and the current weight. Get them from the page, the value of the index text height and text weight that you put in your HTML. And you're going to get the current gender from that drop down, male or female. You're going to get the value of that. And if you've forgotten, patient data, if you've forgotten what that means, you'll see that the name text height, the name text weight, and the name or the ID of the drop down menu. That's where I've got these variables from. Getting value of the text height, value of the text weight, value of the drop down with those IDs. And then it stores those into, calculates the BMI. You can ignore these console logs. That's just for me to troubleshoot and make sure I'm doing it right. So it pops up in the console. In fact, I know I went over this last week, but I'll show you right here in the console. This is where it writes it. Height, weight, and should log the BMI as well. But I don't see it. At any rate, that's what that's for. And then local storage, we're going to set the item height to that value, right? And we're going to set the item weight to that value, the BMI to that value, and the gender to that value. So now you have it stored in local storage, and it's going to transfer over when you change that page. If you notice when I'm going back and forth from the pages, every time you load a page, the data resets itself. So there's nothing here, and it doesn't know. It'll use, because we've already stored it, it'll just use the same data that you had before when you click back over. But if you put new stuff in here, it'll change it when you click over. And that again is done. Let's see, the graph page. On load, it's going to draw. And when you click the button, where does it calculate? I think I have that in a function. Function calc. This little find thing is nice because, okay, here's where it's run. So when I edit the info, when I click the edit button or the add button, that calculation is going to run. I think it does it in a couple places actually. Again, when I add a patient, it's going to run that calculation. And that's what stores it in the local storage. So that is that. That's how you store the variables. Now, when we do those variables, we're going to first start drawing. Now, I laid out all these functions. It's going to draw the weight circle. And we're going to pass it a couple of arguments. We're going to pass it the CTX, center Y. So first, let me go down here to the draw. The draw function is what does everything. And inside the draw function, it calls these other functions. Draw the height, weight, draw the lines, and draw the BMI. So in the function draw, which will be the first one that you create rather than the others, you have to declare the constant, the canvas. And you're getting that element ID graph canvas. So you're telling the computer, go to your HTML on the graph page, find the graph canvas, and then draw a canvas in there. This CTX it's just telling it it's going to be a two-dimensional canvas, but this is what you use to draw everything with, or draw everything on, that CTX. Then we have the two variables that I declared, which just are X and Y coordinates where the circle needs to be on the graph. It wasn't divided properly, so I had to do a little manipulation there. Then we're going to grab the variable from local storage. We're going to get the height. I just call it H. And then we're going to get the weight. And here with the weight, let's say you put in 196 pounds. Well, on our little chart, there is no 196. And because I had to kind of figure out the X and Y coordinates for all this, I didn't want to put it, in between or whatever. I'm just going to make it round up or round down. It's going to round to the nearest tens. So if you're 196, it's going to say you're 200. If you're 194, it's going to say you're 190. That just makes it easier for drawing these lines in the right spot. So I grab the weight variable from local storage, I divide it by 10, and then I multiply by 10, and then I round it using math round to get the whole number. And there's the formula right there, so you don't have to think about it. If you do think about it and spend a little time, it'll make total sense as to how the math works. And again, this is just me console logging the height and weight. And again, you can see that here, the height and the weight, so that I know that it's working properly. And then we're going to go through the height variables, right? So here we've done a for loop where I is equal to 0, and as long as I is less than the height graph variable's length, and I don't know how long this is, I think it's I don't know, 15, 10 or 20, 15 items in that array. As long as it's less than that, we're going to look for the one. We're going to perform the same calculation on each one of these until the number matches what we have stored in local storage, or until it matches the H variable, so that we can get the proper coordinates. I don't feel like I'm explaining this very well. And so because this is a two-dimensional array, right, the height graph is going to look for H. It's going to try and find what we got in local storage right now. The height stored in local storage is 74 inches. So it's going to look for 74. It's going to iterate through that list until it finds 74 inches. And then the height one's easy because it's all inches, and it just increments by 1. So it's going to go through all these until it gets to 74, right? And then it's going to say, okay, 74 equals 411. That's going to be X value across 411 pixels. We'll put that circle right on the correct, I'm sorry, this is height, so we're going the Y variable. So if you notice here, this counter is a kind of a counter within a counter because this is an array of arrays. This is a large array, and each item in that array is another array with 2 items. So let's say in the first step, this is item 0 in that array. So if the height graph is going to look for I, which is going to be 0, 0. It's going to look for the first item, 0, and the first item within that first item, because I have listed 0 here. And then var the Y variable for the up and down from the height graph is going to be the height graph first item, because we're still on 0. The I is still equal to 0. And it's going to be that second variable, the 1. It's going to equal 87. So like the 74 that we were looking at, that's going to be, you know, it won't get there until I reaches, I don't know, 15. We're just guessing here, but so 74. And when I is equal to 15, the second, which is the first, because we start counting from 0. I know that's confusing, but this variable is going to be equal to 411. Does that make sense? And again, you can see that in the console where I have it logged. The Y value is equal to 411 because the height is 74 inches. That comes from the count that we just did in this variable. This array, 74 and 411. Oops. And then I just log that value so that I know it's working correctly. I'm going to do the same thing with the weight graph. As long as I is less than the length of the weight graph, we're going to increment I, and we're going to go through, perform that calculation. And we're going to say, let's say the third, we get to I1, and then W's not equal to the first index. W's not equal to that, we're going to go to 2. W's not equal to that, we're going to go to 3. Actually, this will be 2 because it's 0, 1, 2. But when W is equal to 110, and remember, W is what we pulled out of local storage, it will take the first index right here. When the weight's equal to 110, it's going to get an X value of 188. And then we get to take that the circle height and the Y value, which we just calculated for the height, is going to draw a circle on the canvas at 40 pixels on the X value, and then whatever this Y value ends up being. So var Y ends up being 411 in this case because it's 74 inches. So if I type in 411 here, it'll do the same thing, but we're just using that variable that we get from the arrays. And it's going to be a 20 pixel diameter circle. Same thing with the weight circles. And that's how we get these circles. This is 411 pixels. Oh, no, this one's 411 pixels down, 40 pixels over. And the circle radius is 20 pixels. I hope I'm describing this well. Again, the lines are going to be drawn from X to Y, so from 411 to 74. I think that's right. No, it's going to be 118 to 411, and that's where the lines come from. And that's how you get the straight line that goes all the way over here. Now I did cut it a little bit short because it would end up landing straight in the middle of this, and this line would come all the way in the middle, but I cut it short so that we could make this little circle and you could see what was in the middle of it. You can see, let's go, the draw circle height. We're passing these numbers to this function. So if we go to the draw circle height function, draw circle height, we're passing it the CTX, the center X variable, the center Y variable, and the radius. So those are the 4 things that you have to have when you call that function here. This is something that you do with all your circles. You start angle in radians at 0, end angle radians in 2 times math pi, copy paste. When you begin your circle, you tell it what the arc is going to be. You give it those X and Y coordinates, the radius, which is 20, and the start angle, ending angle, and it makes a circle. My line width was 8. That's just kind of how thick that circle line is. I just picked a stroke style of, on this one, red, and then you tell it to stroke that circle. We'll take these 2 variables and make the stroke 8 pixels wide and give it a red color. Same thing with the weight circle and the BMI circle. They're all the same thing. The only difference is obviously the coordinates that we're passing. The only difference in these formulas is they're really the same function. You can copy and paste these functions. The difference is the information that we pass to them. So I could have done this all in one function, I suppose, but I wanted the stroke style to be different for each function, so that the height and weight is red and blue, and then both of them together is purple. Drawing the lines, again, we have to pass this function a couple of things. We have to pass it the canvas name, CTX, and the X and Y values. Just like in the tutorial that you did, you're going to use the same principles. Move to the X coordinate and at 50 pixels. So 411 that's the weight line. This one would be 411. It would be 60 by 411 because the Y value in this case is 411. And I gave it a style and stroked it 8 pixels wide. And here's where I cut it a little short. Made the Y value, which is 411 in this case, minus 20. And that allows it to stop short of the radius of the circle, because this radius was also 20. So it stops right where the circle starts. And then same thing, the height and weight lines, basically the same function, except one, you're using the X variable to go horizontally, and the other using the Y variable to go vertically. And that's, these drawing 3 circles and 2 lines, I did it in 4 functions. Like I said, they're basically copy and pastes of each other. The only thing that changes is the style and the variables that you send them when you call the function again in your draw function. So you're making another function called draw, and you're calling these other functions in it. I suppose you can do it all in one function if you just want to say draw and then declare the variables begin path each time. You could probably do it in one function, but I chose to do it this way. So we're drawing the circle. Again, I could have made this all one function and maybe passed it a style, but I chose to do it this way. I'm just passing it the information. So they're getting the same information. This 40 is the X value for the circle height, but in circle weight, I want that value to change based on whatever it finds in these variables. And like this Y variable is the same way. I'm passing it 30 in the weight because that stays consistent, but I'm passing it that Y variable in the height because I want it to be based on the variable up here. And then this draw box is just for that little rectangle on the recommendations page. The first thing I did, you have to retrieve that variable from local storage, gender, to figure out, is it a male or a female? If it's a male, I have it reach out, grab this image, the male image, and set the attribute on the HTML ID with the Rex canvas, and that's just what I called it in here. The canvas ID is a Rex canvas. I made it 6x8, which is the same height and width of the page, or of the canvas and the image, so they're the same height and width. And tell if the gender's a male, put it in here. If the gender's a female, you put the female picture in there. It's pretty simple. And then we're going to get the BMI from local storage. And we have a series of if statements. You know, if the BMI is 18.5 or less, then the X value is going to be 17, and we're going to draw a rectangle with that X variable. If it's more than that, it's going to be 163. If the BMI is between this range, we're changing that X variable so it draws that rectangle in a different spot. And then I just kind of put at the bottom in the recommendations box something witty and super funny. You know, based on where they are in the obesity or BMI calendar, it says something at the bottom, gives them recommendations for diet and exercise or whatever. I don't care what it says in here. Something relevant, I suppose. You are obese according to the calendars or calculator's fine. So for each one of the groupings, and you get this information I got just straight from the graphic. See, less than 18.5 to 24.9, 25 to 25.9 or 29.9, and so on. Over 35, extremely obese. And that's what I based my if statements on. And it changes based on where their BMI is, where that X value starts drawing this rectangle. So just like in the flag thing that you're going to do or have done, you draw a rectangle, and it should show you where to put that rectangle. Based on this X value, it's going to be 150 pixels. On the Y value, that stays consistent because we want the box to be in the same place along the Y axis, up and down, right? So it doesn't get higher or lower. It's in the same place all the time. It's always going to be 400 pixels wide. The only thing that changes is the X value across the board, and that changes based on the BMI, that X value. And I just did a couple fill styles to make it pretty, stroke and a fill to make it pretty. I hope you understand what on earth I am talking about. I'm not sure I feel like I'm doing a great job explaining it. But again, if you do the simple flag tutorial, you'll understand how to draw rectangles, lines, and circles. And you're just going to apply that to the same thing. The only thing that I may have done differently is changing this background based on what's in local storage. You should really understand that as well. We're using local storage to to store information and then pull it back out. All you're pulling out is whether or not it's a male or female, and then based on that, you're just changing the background with an if statement. And that's fairly simple, although it looks kind of neat. I think it's a neat little thing. Just remember, you're getting the ID of the canvas. You're going to set that attribute. The style is going to be a background image, and wherever that image is in your folder structure, and it'll do that every time. So again, we go back to patient info, and we want to look at anybody. Your finished product should function just like mine. Be able to search for anybody and click over to the graph, see that it's done it correctly based on the height, weight, the height, the weight, and the BMI. They should be correct. Your lines and circles should draw correctly. And then when you go to the recommendations page, this background should change based on, again, what's in local storage, female or male. and then the rectangle should be drawn based on that BMI. And it's between 20 is between 8.5 and 24.9, so it draws it in there. You should be able to add, you know, tall, skinny, and short, round, and get the stuff to change. Background should change based on a male or female, and the box should move. It's fairly simple. I may have overcomplicated it in my description, but again, it's all in the book. It's in the video. If you have questions, please ask as soon as you can. Next week, I want to touch on next week real quick. Next week is going to be super simple. The only thing that you have to do is tell me what you're going to create for your final project. The app that we've created so far is pretty neat and does a lot of cool things. Under the hood, it's really neat. I don't know how useful it is, but under the hood, it's neat. I want you to come up with something else, something that may be useful. I don't care if it's a record management system or, I don't know, you can even do one of the projects in the book, like no, I don't want you to do the thyroid app or any of that stuff because the code's in the book. Come up with something else that does all of the things that we have done so far. You're going to use local storage or even a server, which we'll cover in chapter 9. Probably for the final, you need to use a server instead of local storage. But I want the app to do something. I want it to show me something, whether it's a graph or just illustrations. I want there to be drawing on it anywhere. There's a whole, I think I put a checklist in here. Yeah, the checklist, it's got to have a user interface. You got design in HTML5. You have to use CSS and jQuery. You have to use JavaScript. There must be a minimum of 4 pages or menu items. Must be a minimum of 3 calculations performed using the information that the user enters in. You want to perform some form of calculations on it. You have to transfer information either to and from local storage or a database, and then do something with that data, fill in a table or some other dynamic action that only happens after the calculations have been performed. You have to have at least one table that's created dynamically, which we did in like chapter 2 or 3. It must be at least one canvas populated with a graph or other illustration, something that is drawn using JavaScript, and include one image file. And that's pretty simple. But for next week, all you have to do is tell me what you plan on doing. And then for the rest of the course, you can work on that. Also, if you are behind, I want you to catch up. Week 8, there's nothing other than that application. Everyone should be completed up to week 8 by the end of week 8. If you have any questions, please send me an email and I'll get to it as soon as I can. If you've emailed me, you know that I'm pretty responsive. If you've asked for help, you know that I can and will help you. So there's really no excuse for not turning stuff in. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.